The smell of one's own skin bubbling is a scent no soul is ever meant to remember, yet for Elsa Ludlow, it was the last thing she knew before the world turned into a screaming wall of orange and black. She wasn't supposed to die like this, caged in the basement of the mountain cabin she had lovingly decorated, the doors bolted from the outside by the man who had promised to grow old with her. Through the shimmering heat and the roar of the accelerant he'd splashed across the floor, she saw him. He wasn't alone. He stood in the rain-slicked driveway, holding a silk umbrella over a woman whose laughter was colder than the storm, watching the wood groan under the weight of the inferno. Before we descend into this tale of divine rebirth and the searing price of betrayal, I want to say a heartfelt hello to all of you joining us today. Whether you're watching from the quiet suburbs of London, the bustling streets of Lagos, or a high-rise in Tokyo, thank you for being here. How are you all doing today? I truly hope you're safe and surrounded by people who deserve your heart. If you haven't already, please consider hitting that subscribe button and joining our community. Your support is the fuel that keeps these stories burning. Where are you watching from today? Drop your country in the comments. I love reading where our global family gathers. The heat was in physical weight, a predatory beast clawing at Elsa's lungs. She pressed her face against the soot-stained floor, her fingers tearing at the floorboards, looking for a cool draft that didn't exist. Above her, the ceiling beams began to wail, a high-pitched splintering sound that signaled the end. Her vision blurred, the silhouette of her husband, the man she had sacrificed her inheritance and her career for, fading into a dark smudge against the night sky. He had called her his light for 5 years. Now he was using her as a torch to illuminate his path toward a new life. But as the oxygen vanished and the darkness of death reached out to claim her, something impossible happened. The pain didn't stop, it transformed. The searing agony that should have reduced her to carbon and silence began to hum. It was a vibration deep in her marrow, a golden resonance that defied the laws of physics. Instead of her flesh falling away, she felt a terrifying ancient pressure building behind her ribs, as if a sun were trying to hatch inside her chest. As the roof finally collapsed in a rain of fire and heavy timber, Elsa Ludlow didn't scream. She didn't turn to ash. In the heart of the wreckage, her eyes snapped open, no longer brown, but glowing with the incandescent fury of a dying star. The question wasn't whether she would survive the night, but whether the world was ready for the goddess who was currently dragging herself out of the embers. To understand the fire that was currently knitting Elsa Ludlow's skin back together, one had to understand the cold, calculated silence of the life she'd lived before the match was struck. For 5 years, Elsa had been the quintessential, supportive wife to Arthur Vane. She was the silent engine behind his meteoric rise in the architectural world, drafting his blueprints in the late hours of the night while he slept, and filtering his every social anxiety through her own grace. Her deepest desire was simple, perhaps even dangerously humble. She wanted to belong. Raised in a series of sterile boarding schools after the mysterious disappearance of her parents, Elsa had spent her life feeling like a guest in other people's homes. In Arthur, she thought she had finally found her foundation. But Arthur Vane was a man built of hollowed-out dreams and borrowed brilliance. He didn't just want success. He craved a pedestal that required a sacrifice. While Elsa saw their marriage as a partnership of souls, Arthur saw it as a temporary scaffolding. He was a man who could smile at you while measuring the height of the cliff he intended to push you from. His fear wasn't losing Elsa. It was the world discovering that without her he was nothing more than a mid-level draftsman with an expensive suit and a silver tongue. Then there was Sienna Sterling, the woman Elsa had seen standing under that silk umbrella. Sienna wasn't just a lover. She was a predator who recognized a kindred spirit in Arthur's ambition. She was the daughter of the city's most influential developer, a woman who treated people like disposable assets. To Sienna, Elsa was a nuisance, a legal tie to a fortune and a reputation that she wanted for herself. She had whispered the idea of the mountain accident into Arthur's ear like a lullaby, turning his resentment into a weapon. The relationships in Elsa's life were a web of mirrors. Her best friend, Gwen Stacy, a blunt and fiercely loyal investigative journalist, had tried to warn her. Gwen had seen the way Arthur looked at his phone when Elsa walked into the room, not with guilt but with a clinical detachment. "He's hollow, Elsa," Gwen had said over coffee just a week before the fire. "People like that don't love, they colonize. You're giving your light to a black hole." Elsa had laughed it off, blinded by the belief that her devotion could fill the void in the man she loved. What Elsa didn't know, what even Arthur didn't suspect, was the secret buried in her own DNA. Her disappeared parents hadn't been ordinary people fleeing debt or boredom. They were the last guardians of a lineage that predated the city's concrete foundations. Elsa had always felt too warm, her body temperature consistently hovering just above the human norm, her scars healing within hours, her dreams filled with the sound of wings beating against a golden sky. She had suppressed these anomalies, wanting so desperately to be normal for Arthur, to be the predictable wife he claimed to need. But as she lay amidst the charred ruins of the cabin, the normal woman was dead. The part of her that sought permission to exist had burned away with her wedding dress. In its place was a burgeoning consciousness that felt the heat of the embers not as a threat, but as a homecoming. She could feel the molecules of the wood ash around her, the way the carbon vibrated with a hidden energy. She wasn't just breathing, she was drawing the heat into herself, fueling the restoration of her lungs and the sharpening of her mind. As the sun began to peek over the jagged mountain peaks, casting a pale judgmental light over the smoking black scar on the hillside, Elsa stood up. The movements were fluid, predatory, and entirely devoid of the hesitation that had defined her for years. She looked down at her hands. They were unblemished, glowing with a faint, subcutaneous shimmer that pulsed like a heartbeat. She was no longer just a wife, a victim, or a ghost. She was a biological impossibility, an ancient power wearing the face of a woman who had been discarded. The betrayal had been the catalyst. Arthur hadn't just ended their marriage, he had cracked the shell of a goddess. And as Elsa stepped out of the ash, naked but for the soot that clung to her like war paint, she didn't feel the sting of the morning chill. She felt the pull of the city below, the place where Arthur and Sienna were likely toasting to their tragic loss. The world officially declared Elsa Ludlow dead at 9:42 a.m. In the city, Arthur Vane sat in a Mahogany Road police station, a masterclass in performative grief. He buried his face in his hands, his shoulders shaking with sobs that were actually suppressed tremors of adrenaline. Beside him, Sienna Sterling played the role of the concerned family friend, her hand resting delicately on his arm, a silent claim of ownership. The authorities called it a tragic electrical fire, a freak accident in an isolated cabin. Case closed. But 30 miles away, on a dirt road leading away from the smoldering ruins, the deceased was walking. Elsa's bare feet didn't feel the sharp gravel or the cold mountain mud. Every step she took felt like the earth was yielding to her. Her mind was a kaleidoscope of fire and static, the voice of the woman who had begged for her life replaced by a low rhythmic thrumming. She needed to get to the city. She needed to see the look on his face when the ghost came home. Suddenly, the silence of the forest was broken by the crunch of heavy tires. A matte black SUV drifted around the bend, skidding to a halt just inches from her. Elsa didn't flinch. She didn't even blink. The driver's side door opened and a man stepped out. He didn't look like a local or a hiker. He wore a tailored charcoal overcoat that cost more than Arthur's car, and his eyes, piercing and unervingly calm, were the color of cooling steel. This was Logan Hunt, a man whose reputation in the city's underground was whispered in tones of reverence and fear. He wasn't a businessman, he was a fixer for the kind of problems that didn't exist in law books. "You're late," Logan said, his voice a gravelly baritone. He didn't look shocked to see a naked woman covered in ash and glowing with a faint golden light. He looked relieved. "Who are you?" Elsa asked. Her voice didn't sound like her own. It had a resonance to it, like two notes being struck at once. "Someone who has been waiting 30 years for a bird to fall out of the sky," Logan replied, tossing his overcoat toward her. "The fire didn't just wake you up, Elsa. It signaled every predator within 1,000 miles that the phoenix has finally hatched. If you go back to the city looking like that, you won't get your revenge. You'll get a cage in a laboratory." Elsa caught the coat, the heavy wool feeling like a suit of armor. "Arthur did this. He thinks I'm Ash. Arthur Vane is a pawn in a game he's too stupid to understand." Logan stepped closer and for the first time, Elsa felt a flicker of something other than rage. There was a magnetic pull toward this stranger, a strange ancient recognition that hummed in her blood. "He didn't just want you dead. He was paid to burn you. He was told that fire is the only way to see if the legend is true." The revelation hit Elsa harder than the heat of the cabin. Arthur hadn't just betrayed her for a lover. He had sold her. Her entire marriage had been a long con, a physical stress test to see if she would ignite. "I'm going back," Elsa whispered, her fingernails lengthening into obsidian points. "I'm going to burn everything he loves." "Then you need to do it right," Logan said, opening the passenger door. "A goddess doesn't just scream. She reigns. You want to ruin him? Don't just kill him. Take back the empire you built for him while he watches from the gutter." As Elsa climbed into the vehicle, leaving the mountain behind, she made a silent vow. The woman who loved Arthur Vane was dead. The Phoenix was hungry. I'd love to know what you think of this twist. Drop a comment below if you think Logan is an ally or if he has his own dark motives. And if you're enjoying Elsa's rebirth, don't forget to subscribe so you don't miss her first encounter with Arthur. The penthouse of the Vane Sterling building smelled of expensive lilies and deceit. For Arthur, the week following the tragedy had been a whirlwind of insurance settlements and champagne toasts hidden behind closed doors. He stood at the floor-to-ceiling window, looking out over the city he thought he finally owned. Beside him, Sienna was already redrafting the company's masthead. "Vane and Sterling," she murmured, her red-tipped finger tracing the glass. "It has a certain permanence to it, don't you think?" Arthur didn't notice the flicker of the lights. He didn't feel the sudden localized spike in temperature that caused the ice in his scotch to hiss and melt in seconds. He was too busy admiring his own reflection. Meanwhile, in a high-tech loft owned by Logan Hunt, Elsa was undergoing a transformation that was less about fashion and more about warfare. Logan's resources were vast, but his knowledge of Elsa's lineage was deeper. He sat across from her, his steel-gray eyes tracking the way the air shimmered around her skin. "You can't just walk in there and melt him, Elsa," Logan cautioned, sliding a tablet across the table. It showed a bank of hidden accounts Arthur had been using to funnel her inheritance into Sienna's shell companies. "If you kill him now, he dies a grieving widower. He wins. You need to strip him of the one thing he loves more than himself, his reputation." Elsa reached for a glass of water, and as her fingers brushed the crystal, the liquid began to steam. She pulled back, her jaw tightening. "I feel like a volcano trapped in a porcelain doll, Logan. Every time I think of how he held that umbrella for her while I was screaming, I just want to watch him turn to charcoal." "Use that heat," Logan said, stepping closer. The tension between them was electric, a strange magnetic pull that Elsa couldn't explain. He didn't fear her, he seemed to thrive in her orbit. "Channel it into your focus. I've secured you an identity as Elsa Thorne, a silent partner from an overseas investment firm. Arthur is desperate for a capital injection to start his new Phoenix project. Ironic, isn't it? He's looking for a savior. You're going to be his ruin." The infiltration began at the city's most prestigious charity gala. Arthur and Sienna were the guests of honor, bathed in the glow of sympathetic spotlights. When Elsa entered the ballroom, the atmosphere shifted. She wore a gown of liquid gold that seemed to catch light that wasn't there. Her hair, once a soft brown, now held streaks of iridescent copper that looked like cooling embers. She watched from the shadows as Arthur worked the room. He was charming, his voice thick with a practiced tremor as he spoke of his late wife's vision. "He's using my blueprints for the new museum," Elsa whispered into her earpiece. She could feel the fire beneath her ribs beginning to thrash. "He's calling them his tribute to me." "Stay calm," Logan's voice crackled in her ear. He was stationed at the bar, keeping a watchful eye on the perimeter. "Wait for the introduction." The moment came when Sienna, ever the social climber, spotted the new money in the room. She marched Arthur over to where Elsa stood. Arthur's smile was wide, professional, until he met Elsa's eyes. He froze. His glass tilted, a drop of expensive bourbon falling onto his polished shoe. The color drained from his face, leaving him a sickly shade of gray. "Elsa," he breathed, the word a strangled ghost. "I'm sorry," Elsa replied, her voice smooth and devoid of the warmth he once knew. She extended a hand that was perfectly steady, though the air around it distorted with heat. "I believe you have me mistaken for someone else, Mr. Vane. I'm Elsa Thorne. We have a meeting tomorrow regarding your infrastructure problems." Sienna laughed, a sharp, brittle sound. "Arthur darling, you're seeing ghosts. The resemblance is striking, I suppose, But Miss Thorne is here to save our firm, not haunt it. As Elsa shook Arthur's hand, she leaned in. The heat from her palm was borderline painful, though she kept her expression icy. You look like you've seen a fire, Mr. Vane, she whispered. You should be careful. Heat has a way of lingering in the bones. Arthur stumbled back, his heart hammering against his ribs. He spent the rest of the night watching her from across the room, his mind a chaotic mess of guilt and terror. But Elsa wasn't done. While she played the role of the investor, she was silently sabotaging his digital empire. With a literal touch, she could override the ballroom's servers, siphoning data from Arthur's phone onto Logan's drive. She found what she was looking for: a series of encrypted messages between Arthur and an unknown contact, detailing the stress test Logan had mentioned. The betrayal went deeper than a mistress. Arthur hadn't just sold her. He had been promised a seat at a table of god-makers, if he could prove Elsa's blood was divine. He didn't just want me dead, Elsa told Logan later that night, her eyes glowing in the dark of the car. He wanted to harvest me. The rising tension isn't just between you and Arthur anymore, Elsa, Logan said, his hand lingering near hers on the center console. The people he sold you to, they know you're back. And they're coming to see if the second burn takes. The air in Logan's safe house didn't just feel warm anymore. It felt pressurized, as if the oxygen itself were being converted into pure intent. Elsa stood in the center of a room filled with ancient maps and flickering monitors, her skin pulsing with a rhythmic golden light that timed itself to her quickening heartbeat. She had just seen the decrypted files from Arthur's phone, a series of wire transfers from an organization known only as the Cinder Trust. They didn't just pay him to kill me, Elsa whispered, her voice vibrating with a dual-tone resonance that cracked a nearby water glass. They paid him to catalog the transition. He had cameras in that cabin, Logan. He wasn't just watching me die, he was live-streaming my ascension to a board of directors. Logan remained standing by the window, his silhouette dark against the city's neon backdrop. He didn't turn around, but his voice was heavy with a truth he had been rationing. The Cinder Trust isn't a board of directors, Elsa. They are harvesters. They believe that the blood of the phoenix, the ichor, is the key to biological immortality. They've been hunting your lineage for 3 centuries. Elsa stepped toward him, the floorboards charring slightly beneath her bare feet. How do you know this? You talk about my family like you were there. You said you've been waiting 30 years for a bird to fall from the sky. My parents disappeared 30 years ago. Logan finally turned. In the dim light, his gray eyes weren't just steel, they were molten. He reached up and unbuttoned his shirt, pulling the fabric back to reveal his chest. A massive, jagged scar ran from his collarbone to his waist, not a surgical mark, but a burn so deep it looked like it had been branded by a lightning strike. I wasn't waiting for any bird, Elsa, Logan said, his voice cracking. I was waiting for you. I was your father's apprentice. I was 20 years old when the trust found your family's sanctum. Your parents knew they couldn't protect both the legacy and the child. So they gave me a choice: stay and die with them to buy time, or take the embryonic spark, the essence of the phoenix, and find a way to hide it until the next bloodline was ready. Elsa froze. The embryonic spark wasn't a metaphor. She remembered the stories her mother told her about a golden seed she had to keep tucked in her heart. You were there the night they died? I was the one who pulled you from the wreckage of their car before the trust could verify the bodies, Logan confessed, stepping into her personal space. The heat radiating from Elsa should have blistered his skin, but he didn't flinch. I placed you in those boarding schools. I created the paper trail that led Arthur Vane to you. I thought if you lived a normal life, the spark would stay dormant. I thought I could protect you by keeping you human. The betrayal hit Elsa with more force than Arthur's match ever could. You used me as bait? You let me marry a monster just to see if I'd stay hidden? I tried to vet him. Logan shouted, his professional veneer finally shattering. I thought Arthur was a weak, controllable man who would keep you safe in a golden cage. I didn't realize he was ambitious enough to seek out the trust on his own. When I realized he was planning the fire, I tried to stop it, but the trust had me intercepted. By the time I got to the mountain, the cabin was already a pyre. He reached out, his hands hovering near her face. I didn't want you to burn, Elsa. But now that you have, you aren't just a goddess. You are the only thing that can stop the trust from turning the world into a furnace. Your blood is the cure and their poison. The revelation was a double-edged sword. Elsa's entire life, her marriage, her loneliness, her very survival, had been a curated experiment managed by the man she was starting to trust and the man she had promised to destroy. Suddenly, the loft's security perimeter wailed. The monitors flickered to life, showing a tactical team in heat-resistant suits breaching the lower lobby. At the head of the unit was Sienna Sterling, no longer looking like a socialite, but wearing a tactical headset and carrying a specialized containment canister. "They're here," Logan said, drawing a weapon that glowed with a strange blue kinetic energy. "Arthur must have figured out Elsa Thorne was alive faster than we anticipated. He sold your location to the Trust for a seat on their council." Elsa felt the rage peak. It wasn't just a flicker anymore. It was a roar. The vulnerability she had shared with Logan transformed into a searing resolve. "Let them come," she said, her hair beginning to float as if caught in an updraft of pure heat. "Arthur thinks he's a king because he holds a match. He's about to find out what happens when you try to cage the sun." As the elevator doors began to groan under the pressure of a forced entry, Elsa grabbed Logan's hand. Instead of burning him, the contact stabilized her. She drew from his strength and he from her heat. "If we survive this," Elsa hissed as the doors blew inward, "I'm still going to ruin you for what you did to my childhood." "I'd expect nothing less, Your Majesty," Logan replied with a grim, beautiful smile. The stakes just hit the ceiling. Was Logan right to hide Elsa's identity, or is he just as guilty as Arthur? I want to see your theories in the comments. And if you want to see Elsa finally unleash her divine fury, make sure you're subscribed for the next part. The elevator doors didn't just open, they were liquidated. A high-frequency pulse ripples through the air, shattering every window in the loft and throwing Logan backward into a rack of servers. Elsa stood her ground, her feet melting the synthetic carpet into the concrete floor, but the tactical team from the Cinder Trust was prepared. They didn't use bullets. They used pressurized liquid nitrogen cannons, flooding the room with a sub-zero fog that fought her radiance inch by agonizing inch. "Logan!" Elsa screamed, her voice muffled by the thick, freezing vapor. Through the white haze she saw a shadow move with clinical precision. It wasn't a soldier, it was Arthur. He wasn't cowering or grieving anymore. He wore a thermal-shielded suit, his face visible through a reinforced visor. He looked at Elsa not with love or even fear, but with the cold calculation of a man looking at a winning lottery ticket. "You always were too bright for your own good, Elsa," Arthur's voice amplified through his suit's external speakers. "Did you really think a fixer like Logan Hunt could hide a sun in a basement? The Trust has been tracking your thermal signature since the moment you stepped out of that cabin." Before Elsa could lung, a heavy electrified net, woven from a heat-resistant alloy, dropped from the ceiling. As it touched her skin, it didn't just burn. It inverted her power. Every spark of divinity she tried to summon was sucked out of her and fed back into the net's capacitors, shocking her system into a state of paralysis. She collapsed, her knees hitting the scorched floor, the golden glow in her veins flickering like a dying bulb. "Take her," Arthur commanded. "And kill the apprentice. He's outlived his usefulness." "No," Elsa gasped, reaching out a trembling hand toward where Logan lay motionless under a pile of debris. But a heavy boot slammed into her shoulder, pinning her down. The world went black as a sedative-laced mist was pumped directly into her face. When she finally drifted back to consciousness, the smell hit her first. It was the scent of charred pine and wet ash. Her eyes snapped open and her heart froze. She wasn't in a lab. He was back at the mountain. The Trust had brought her to the ruins of the cabin, the very place where her nightmare began. She was chained to a blackened support beam, the only part of the structure still standing. Rain mixed with soot dripped from the jagged remains of the roof, chilling her to the bone. Her power felt distant, a faint ember buried under miles of cold lead. Arthur stepped into her line of sight, holding a jagged obsidian dagger. Beside him stood Sienna, looking bored as she checked a handheld monitor. "The transition is complete," Sienna noted. "Her internal temperature is dropping. If we don't harvest the heart spark in the next 10 minutes, the ichor will stabilize and we'll lose the purity." "I loved you, Arthur," Elsa whispered, her voice cracking with a despair that felt heavier than the chains. "I gave you everything. Why wasn't that enough?" Arthur knelt in front of her, the obsidian blade catching the dull gray light of the storm. Love is a human luxury, Elsa. I was born for more than a suburban house and a supportive wife. I was born to live forever. Your parents died protecting a secret that belongs to the world. To me. You were never a person to me. You were just the packaging for the ultimate prize. He raised the dagger, aiming for the center of her chest, where the golden light pulsed feebly. Elsa looked up at the stormy sky, the rain washing the soot from her face. For the first time she felt truly alone. Logan was gone. Her parents were ghosts. And the man who had promised to cherish her was about to carve the life out of her ribs. Do it, she hissed, her eyes filling with tears of pure, molten frustration. But know this, Arthur. You didn't just marry a goddess. You betrayed the fire itself. And fire never forgets. Arthur sneered, his grip tightening on the hilt. Fire is just a tool, Elsa. And tools don't have memories. As he lunged with the blade, a deafening roar echoed through the valley, not of thunder, but of an engine pushed to its absolute limit. A black streak tore through the treeline, heading straight for the ruins. Elsa is at her absolute lowest point, chained in the ruins of her own murder. Is Logan still alive, or is she truly alone? Tell me in the comments if you think Arthur deserves a quick end or a slow burn. And if you're holding your breath, hit that subscribe button to see the turning point. The black SUV didn't slow down as it hit the perimeter of the ruins. It became a battering ram of reinforced steel. The vehicle slammed into the Trust's containment van, sent a shower of glass and sparks into the rainy night, and skidded to a halt just yards from the blackened beam where Elsa was chained. Logan Hunt stepped out of the driver's side, but he wasn't the composed fixer she'd met on the mountain road. Blood streamed from a jagged cut on his forehead, and his charcoal coat was shredded, revealing the glowing rhythmic pulse of the scar on his chest. He wasn't just holding a weapon, he was the weapon. Arthur. Logan's voice was a guttural roar that seemed to shake the very foundations of the mountain. Get away from her. Arthur laughed, a high, thin sound of desperation as he pressed the obsidian dagger against Elsa's throat. You're a ghost, Hunt. You should have stayed under the rubble in the city. One more step and I'll take the heartspark right now. I don't need her alive to be immortal. Sienna hissed a command into her radio, and 2 remaining Trust soldiers leveled their nitrogen cannons at Logan. But they were too slow. Logan didn't reach for a gun, he reached for the air itself. The scar on his chest flared with a blinding azure light, the embryonic spark he had carried for 30 years. He wasn't a phoenix, but he was the guardian, and he had spent decades absorbing the residue of the goddess's power to protect her. With a violent motion, Logan slammed his palms into the mud. A shockwave of pure kinetic energy tore through the ground, upending the soldiers and sending Sienna flying into the remains of the cabin's stone fireplace. Elsa! Logan shouted, his eyes locking onto hers. The fire isn't in the wood and it isn't in the air. It's in the betrayal. Stop fighting the cold and start feeding on the rage. In that moment, the leaden weight on Elsa's soul snapped. She looked at Arthur, at the man who had shared her bed, who had whispered forever into her ear, and who was currently trying to find the best angle to butcher her. The despair didn't vanish, it curdled. It turned into a white-hot focused realization. She had spent her life being supportive, being kind, being human for a man who didn't even view her as a sentient being. I am not your packaging, she thought. The golden ember in her chest didn't just flicker, it detonated. The electrified net that had been draining her suddenly couldn't handle the load. The metal began to glow white, then yellow, then blue, before vaporizing into a cloud of metallic dust. The chains around her wrists didn't break. They melted, liquid iron dripping into the ash like tears of fire. Elsa stood up. The rain hitting her skin didn't just evaporate. It turned into a localized storm of superheated steam. Her eyes were no longer human. They were twin vortices of solar fury. Arthur, she said, her voice sounding like the tectonic plates of the earth shifting. You wanted to see the phoenix? Look closely. This is the last thing you will ever see. Arthur stumbled back, the obsidian dagger falling from his nerveless fingers. He looked around for Sienna, for the Trust, for an escape, but he was standing in the center of a ring of fire that had spontaneously ignited in the mud. Logan stood by the SUV, breathing hard, his azure glow dimming as he watched the true sun rise. He had done his job. He had brought the spark to the flame. Elsa, wait. Arthur screamed, his voice breaking as the heat began to blister the paint on his high-tech suit. "I can help you. I know how to control it. We can be gods together." Elsa stepped forward, her bare feet leaving molten glass prints in the mountain soil. She reached out and touched his visor. The reinforced glass didn't shatter. It simply dissolved. "You don't control the sun, Arthur," Elsa whispered, her face inches from his. "You just pray it doesn't look at you. The goddess has fully awakened and the table has finally turned. Is there any redemption left for Arthur, or is he about to become a cautionary tale? I want to see your justice emojis in the comments. And don't forget to subscribe. We are heading into the final confrontation." The glass of the Vain-Sterling penthouse didn't shatter. It turned to liquid and wept down the side of the skyscraper like molten tears. Elsa stepped through the empty frame, her feet hovering an inch above the plush designer carpet that instantly curled and blackened beneath her. She was no longer wearing the gold gown of a socialite. She was draped in a shifting, incandescent shroud of pure solar energy that licked the air like wings. Inside the office, the board of the Cinder Trust, the godmakers, who had watched her burn on a live stream, sat paralyzed around a mahogany table. At the head of that table sat Sienna Sterling, her face bruised from the mountain, her eyes wide with a terror that no amount of money could soothe. Beside her, stripped of his tactical suit and his dignity, was Arthur. He looked small. He looked human. "The harvest is over," Elsa said, her voice echoing with the resonance of 1,000 suns. Sienna reached for a silent alarm, but as her finger neared the button, the plastic melted into a puddle of gray sludge. "We can settle this, Elsa. Think of the advancement. Your DNA could cure every disease, and every physical limitation." "You didn't want a cure," Elsa interrupted, stepping closer. The mahogany table began to groan, the wood fibers weeping sap before bursting into flame. "You wanted a monopoly on life. You turned a marriage into a laboratory and a soul into a commodity." Outside, the city watched as the top floor of the Vain-Sterling building began to glow with a light that rivaled the noonday sun. Logan Hunt stood on the street level, keeping the perimeter clear, his steel-gray eyes fixed on the heights. He knew this wasn't just a haunting. It was a reckoning. Arthur scrambled backward, his heels catching on the legs of his expensive leather chair. "Elsa, please. I was pressured. The trust. They threatened me. I did it to protect you in the long run." The lie was so pathetic it caused the air to shimmer with a violent violet heat. Elsa reached out, but she didn't strike him. She didn't turn him to ash. Instead, she pressed her glowing palm against the center of his chest, the very spot where he had aimed the obsidian dagger. "You wanted immortality, Arthur," Elsa whispered, her eyes burning into his. "I'm going to give you a version of it." She didn't kill him. Instead, she reached into the very fabric of his being and cauterized his connection to the world. She burned away his ability to feel warmth, to taste food, to experience the touch of another human being. She left him physically whole but internally a void. A living shadow who would spend the rest of his long, healthy life feeling nothing but the phantom chill of the mountain rain. He would be a monument to his own emptiness. As for Sienna and the trust, Elsa didn't need to use fire. She simply touched the central server hub in the room. In a flash of golden light, every encrypted file, every record of their illegal human experimentation, and every cent of their blood money was broadcast to every news agency and law enforcement database in the world. The empire didn't burn. It evaporated under the light of total transparency. Sienna fell to her knees as the sound of sirens began to wail from the streets below, a rising tide of justice that she couldn't bribe her way out of. Elsa turned toward the open window. The rage that had fueled her journey from the ash was finally cooling, transforming into a steady, radiant warmth. She looked down at her hands. They were no longer glowing with the threat of destruction, but with the soft amber light of a new dawn. "It's finished," she murmured into the wind. Logan's voice crackled through the calms she still wore. "The bird didn't just fly, Elsa. She took the whole sky with her. Come down. It's time to go home." As she drifted down from the penthouse, a literal falling star in the heart of the city, the citizens stopped and stared. They didn't see a monster. They saw a miracle. The woman who had been discarded was now the most powerful force on the planet, and for the first time in 30 years the Phoenix wasn't hiding. Talk about a power move. Elsa didn't just take his life, she took his soul. Do you think Arthur's cold immortality is a fitting punishment? Let me know in the comments. And if you're ready to see how Elsa rebuilds her life and what happens with Logan, stay tuned for the final part. Part 9. Satisfying conclusion. The smoke over the city finally cleared, replaced by a sunset so vibrant it looked as if the sky itself was paying homage to the woman who had conquered it. Elsa stood on the edge of the mountain cliff, the exact spot where the cabin had once been a tomb. Now the charred remains were gone, replaced by a carpet of wildflowers that had sprouted overnight, fueled by the divine residual heat in the soil. Life didn't just return to this place, it thrived. Beside her, Logan Hunt leaned against the hood of his SUV, his charcoal coat finally discarded. He looked younger, the heavy burden of 30 years of secrecy having lifted from his shoulders. He watched Elsa as she closed her eyes, her skin catching the amber light of the fading sun. She wasn't glowing with a frantic, destructive energy anymore. She was radiant, a steady, comforting warmth that made the mountain air feel like a permanent spring. "The trust is dismantled, Elsa," Logan said, his voice quiet. "Sienna is facing life in a federal facility that doesn't have silk sheets. And Arthur." He paused, looking out over the valley. "Arthur is alive, technically. But the doctors say he's in a state of sensory void. He can't feel heat, cold, or even the weight of his own clothes. He's a ghost in a healthy body." Elsa opened her eyes, and for the first time in 5 years, they were clear of the shadows of doubt. "He wanted to be immortal. I gave him a version of it that matches the emptiness of his heart. It's a mercy compared to what he did to my parents." She turned to Logan, the magnetic pull between them now a bridge of genuine connection. "What about you, Logan? You spent your whole life being a guardian for a girl who didn't know she needed one. What happens to the apprentice now that the phoenix has found her wings?" Logan stepped toward her, his hand reaching out. This time, when his fingers brushed her cheek, there was no distortion, no steam, just the soft electric spark of two souls finally recognizing each other. "I think the apprentice is retired," he whispered. "I'd like to see what the world looks like when I'm not looking at it through a thermal scope. I'd like to see what Elsa Thorne, or whoever you choose to be now, does with a world that finally knows her name." Elsa smiled, a genuine, heartbreakingly beautiful expression that held the wisdom of a goddess and the hope of a woman. "I think I'm done with names given to me by men. I'm just Elsa. And I think I'd like to build something that isn't made of blueprints and lies. I want to build a sanctuary for people like us, those who have been burned and told they were nothing but ash." She reached out and took his hand, their fingers interlacing. The golden light pulsed softly between them, a silent vow of partnership that wasn't built on a contract, but on the fire they had both survived. As they walked back toward the vehicle, leaving the mountain ruins behind, the first stars of the evening began to pierce the veil of the atmosphere. Elsa looked up, no longer afraid of the dark. She knew that even when the sun set, the fire within her would never go out. She was the architect of her own destiny, the queen of the flames, and the woman who had turned a betrayal into a birthright. The fire didn't just remember, it had finally found peace. I want to thank you all so much for joining Elsa on this incredible journey of rebirth and justice. It's been a wild ride from the ashes of that cabin to the heights of the city. What was your favorite moment? Was it the reveal of Logan's true identity or the way Elsa dealt with Arthur? Let me know in the comments below. I read every single one of them. If this story touched your heart and you want more emotional, high-stakes narratives, please hit that subscribe button and ring the notification bell. We have so many more legends to uncover together. Until next time, stay bright, stay strong, and remember, no matter how hot the fire gets, you have the power to rise.